Okay, so I decided that the best way to cover chapters 13 through 18, because really you had to read most of 13 too, is to do a little video blog and play it for you when you get back. So you'll remember all that stuff you read over break, right? You read over break, right? Anyway, so in chapter 13 we left Holden when he was just about to get into a very big mess. And the big mess ended up being a hooker in his room named Sunny, who Holden did not end up doing anything with, and instead just wanted to talk, which Sunny did not understand. On the way out the door, she asked for $10. Holden said no, it was supposed to be $5. So he gave her $5. So she was going to go and tell the elevator guy that hooked Holden up, Maurice. This is not the end of the big mess, but this is the end of chapter 13, when Sunny leaves. Okay, moving on to chapter 14. So after Sunny leaves, Holden starts to think about everything, just sitting around smoking. The first thing he thinks of is about Allie and how he had left Allie out of going BB gun shooting at some point when they were children, and how bad he felt about that. And then he starts to think about praying, but he has a hard time praying. He doesn't really, not very religious guy, doesn't really know what to do. And then he starts to think about the Bible, and then he starts to think about the disciples, and then he starts to muse about Jesus Christ and a guy at school named Arthur Childs, who is a very religious guy. Anyway, all that ends when there's a knock on the door. It is Maurice and Sunny, and the big mess continues. Maurice wants more money than he asked for originally, and Sunny is there with him. So Maurice threatens Holden on principle. Holden says, no, you can't have any more money. They go back and forth until Sunny ends up in the wallet, taking the $5 that they say Holden owes them, and then getting ready to go. And Maurice, though, just can't leave it alone. So he has shoved Holden up against the wall, and Holden calls him a dirty moron. And Maurice snaps his fingers at a place on Holden's pajamas that would be very uncomfortable. And then Holden continues, and Maurice socks him in the stomach. And then at the end of chapter 14 is this sort of imaginary thing that Holden does after this is all over and Maurice and Sunny have left. He says, but I'm crazy, I swear to God. About halfway to the bathroom, I sort of start pretending I had a bullet in my guts. Old Maurice had plugged me. Now I was on my way to the bathroom to get a good shot of bourbon or something to steady my nerves and help me really go into action. I pictured myself coming out of the goddamn bathroom, dressed and all, with my automatic in my pocket, staggering around a little bit. Then I'd walk downstairs instead of using the elevator. I'd hold on to the banister and all with this blood trickling out of the side of my mouth a little at a time. What I'd do, I'd walk down a few floors, holding onto my guts, blood leaking all over the place, and then I'd ring the elevator bell. As soon as Maurice opened the door, he'd see me with the automatic in my hand, and he'd start screaming at me in this very high-pitched, yellow-belly voice to leave him alone, but I'd plug him anyway. 6 shots right through his fat, hairy belly. Then I'd throw my automatic down the elevator shaft after I'd wiped off all the fingerprints and all. Then I'd crawl back to the room and call up Jane and have her come over and bandage up my guts. I pictured her holding a cigarette for me to smoke while I was bleeding and all. The goddamn movies. They can ruin you. I'm not kidding. So Holden goes on then and says, took a bath. He was trying to go to sleep but having a hard time. And then this is the first sort of mention of this, but he says, what I really felt like, though, was committing suicide. I felt like jumping out of the window. I probably would have done it, too, if I'd be sure somebody'd cover me up as soon as I landed. I didn't want a bunch of stupid rubbernecks looking at me when I was all gory. So a big line from Catcher in the Rye, too, and pretty telling on Holden's part, about how he just wants to be hidden and not exposed to everyone and everything. And that ends chapter 14, and actually, that ends day 1. So we're going to pick up at day 2, chapter 15. Okay, so let's move on now to chapter 15. So at the beginning of chapter 15, Holden had just woken up. It's 10 o'clock the next day, finally. And he thinks about giving Jane a call, but then he decides he wasn't in the mood again. Instead, he calls Sally Hayes, an old friend, a girlfriend of his, and invites her out to the theater to see a play. And so she says grand, which he makes fun of because he hates the word grand. He thinks it's very phony. But still, he sets up a date with Sally Hayes. He goes to get something to eat at Grand Central Station and ends up at a little sandwich bar with two nuns, chatting with two nuns. Eventually, the conversation gets to school and a play he knows too, Romeo and Juliet, that you're going to read later in the year. So I'm just going to read you a part. This is on page 111. This is, to tell you the truth, it was sort of embarrassing in a way to be talking about Romeo and Juliet with her. I mean, that play gets pretty sexy in some parts, and she was a nun and all, but she asked me. So I discussed it with her for a while. Well, I'm not too crazy about Romeo and Juliet, I said. I mean, like them, but I don't know. They get pretty annoying sometimes. I mean, I felt much sorrier when old Mercutio got killed than when Romeo and Juliet did. The thing is, I never liked Romeo too much after Mercutio gets stabbed by that other man, Juliet's cousin. What's his name? Tybalt. That's right, Tybalt, I said. I always forget that guy's name. It was Romeo's fault. I mean, I liked him the best in the play, old Mercutio. I don't know. All those Montagues and Capulets, they're all right, especially Juliet, but Mercutio, it's hard to explain. He was very smart and entertaining and all. The thing is, it drives me crazy if somebody gets killed, especially somebody very smart and entertaining and all, and it's somebody else's fault. Romeo and Juliet, at least it was their own fault. So that's what Holden thinks about Romeo and Juliet. And then a little more information kind of inside Holden's head about religion and Catholicism and basically how they're always trying to sell it to you. But he does give $10 donation to the nuns because he feels bad about, I don't know, or just guilty, I think, for having the money, and a little bit bad at the end for blowing smoke in their face, but he's already given them the $10. At that point, he just wishes that he'd given them more. And that's how chapter 15 ends.